Hi there. Today is January 24th, 2026. The question of whether Britain should contemplate rejoining the European Union, EU, has become increasingly pertinent in today's political landscape. It's been over 6 years since the UK officially left the EU, a move that has since shaped the country's economic, social, and political fabric in profound ways. The ensuing period has been characterized by uncertainty and introspection as the nation navigates its path outside the EU framework.
What makes this question urgent now is the evolving economic challenges, the shifting political landscape within the UK itself, and the global geopolitical tensions that demand a reassessment of alliances and strategies. The economic implications of Brexit continue to unfold, with the UK experiencing both anticipated and unforeseen consequences. Trade relationships have had to be renegotiated, regulatory frameworks realigned, and businesses have faced significant disruptions. The initial promise of boundless freedom to craft trade deals independent of EU constraints has met the reality of complex negotiations that have not always yielded the hoped-for benefits. Moreover, the economic turbulence, partly exacerbated by a global downturn and pandemic-related challenges, has sparked debate about the long-term sustainability of the UK's current trajectory. On the political front, there is a noticeable shift in public opinion and political rhetoric. Recent polls suggest a growing disenchantment among the public with the current state of affairs, with some segments expressing nostalgia for the stability and predictability associated with EU membership. The political landscape within the UK itself is fraught with regional tensions, particularly with Scotland and Northern Ireland, where the EU question has reignited calls for independence and unification. Moreover, the global political climate is marked by rising tensions and the resurgence of protectionist policies in various parts of the world, making international alliances ever more critical. In such a scenario, the advantages of being part of a larger economic and political bloc like the EU cannot be easily dismissed. This context makes the question of rejoining the EU not just timely, but also essential to address. However, as we delve deeper into the complex tapestry of this issue, it becomes apparent that the conventional wisdom surrounding Britain's potential return to the EU is fraught with misconceptions. There exists a narrative that presumes the benefits of rejoining are clear-cut and overwhelmingly positive. Yet this overlooks the multifaceted nature of the decision and its implications. It is imperative to dissect these assumptions and scrutinize them against the backdrop of evidence and historical precedent to understand fully what rejoining the EU would entail for Britain. Conventional wisdom regarding Britain's possible re-entry into the EU is often predicated on the simplistic notion that doing so would automatically restore the economic benefits and political influence the UK enjoyed as a member. This narrative suggests that the pre-Brexit status quo can be easily reinstated, and that the path to rejoining is both straightforward and desirable. However, this perspective overlooks the intricacies of both the EU's evolution since the UK's departure, and the profound changes that Brexit has wrought on the UK's own political and socio-economic landscape. A prevalent assumption among proponents of rejoining is that it would immediately remedy the economic disruptions Brexit has caused. The notion that re-entry would seamlessly restore the trade relationships and economic integration that characterized the UK's EU membership overlooks the considerable changes the EU itself has undergone. Since Brexit, the EU has moved forward with initiatives in digital transition, green policies, and defense collaboration, areas where the UK would need to realign its policies and strategies significantly. Moreover, the narrative that rejoining the EU is purely an economic decision fails to account for the political dimensions involved. The EU's integrationist trajectory, with proposals for deeper fiscal union and coordinated foreign policy, may not align with Britain's historical preference for retaining national sovereignty over key policy areas. This discrepancy raises questions about how rejoining the EU might constrain the UK's decision-making autonomy. The assumption that the UK could easily rejoin without forfeiting significant concessions misjudges the EU's likely insistence on a firm commitment to its integrationist principles. Additionally, there's a tendency to romanticize the UK's previous EU membership by overlooking the domestic political divisions it fueled, divisions that ultimately contributed to the Brexit vote itself. The memory of contentious debates over EU regulations, immigration, and democratic accountability is often sidelined in the pro-rejoin rhetoric. This selective recall risks ignoring the very real societal rifts that persist, potentially exacerbating political polarization if the rejoining is perceived as disregarding the original democratic mandate of the Brexit referendum. Furthermore, the belief that rejoining the EU would instantly restore the UK's global standing and influence assumes that the geopolitical landscape has remained static. In reality, the world has continued to evolve, with emerging powers and shifting alliances redefining international relations. The UK's role on the global stage is now influenced by its independent foreign policy initiatives and its approach to bilateral relationships outside the EU framework. This complexity is often underappreciated in the conventional narrative, which simplistically equates EU membership with enhanced global influence. In reassessing these assumptions, it becomes critical to acknowledge that the decision to rejoin the EU is not merely a reversal of Brexit, but a fundamentally new negotiation, with its own unique set of challenges and compromises. The evidence, both from historical precedent and current reporting, provides a more nuanced view of the situation, challenging the conventional wisdom that paints rejoining as an unequivocal panacea. The historical record and documented cases surrounding Brexit and its aftermath offer a more nuanced understanding of the implications of the UK potentially rejoining the EU. Historical precedent reveals that the post-referendum period was marked by complex negotiations and a re-evaluation of national priorities, an arduous process that would undoubtedly be mirrored, albeit in reverse, should the UK seek re-entry into the EU. One of the clearest lessons from Brexit is the intricacy of unpicking decades of integration. Reports documented the immense complexity of disentangling the UK from the EU's regulatory and legal frameworks, affecting everything from trade to environmental standards. This historical backdrop suggests that reintegrating into the EU would not merely reverse these processes, but would require new negotiations to account for changes since the UK's departure. The EU has advanced in numerous policy areas, most notably in digital economy regulation and environmental policy, which the UK would need to adopt or negotiate exceptions for should it seek to rejoin. Moreover, public reporting has documented the evolving nature of EU membership itself. The EU has introduced reforms aimed at deepening integration among member states, particularly in areas of fiscal policy and collective security. This trajectory is evident in the EU's next-generation EU recovery plan and its strategic autonomy discourse, which emphasizes resilience and joint capabilities. The UK's potential re-entry would necessitate alignment with these initiatives, which may conflict with the UK's historical stance on retaining maximum national sovereignty. The evidence also highlights the socio-political shifts within the UK. Since Brexit, the divisions that Brexit laid bare have not vanished, but have transformed, with new fault lines emerging around issues of identity, regional autonomy, and economic inequality. Public opinion is increasingly fragmented, with some polls indicating a shift towards favoring EU membership, while others reveal a persistent desire for national control over immigration and border policies, an issue that remains contentious. The social fabric is thus more complex than the binary choice of rejoining or remaining outside the EU suggests. International comparisons provide further perspective. Countries like Norway and Switzerland, while not EU members, maintain close ties through alternative agreements that balance access to the single market with retained sovereignty. These models, though not directly applicable to the UK due to differing scales and contexts, showcase the diversity of relationships possible with the EU and imply that rejoining is not the sole means of achieving economic and political objectives. Logical inference drawn from these documented realities suggests that the path to rejoining the EU, far from being a simple return, would involve navigating a new set of negotiations, re-evaluating national priorities, and reconciling domestic political and social divisions. The evidence thus challenges the notion that rejoining the EU is a straightforward remedy for the challenges facing the UK, highlighting instead the complexities and trade-offs inherent in such a decision. The genuine trade-off inherent in the debate over Britain rejoining the EU lies in the uncomfortable truths about sovereignty, political identity, and the economic benefits of integration. This tension is at the heart of why the problem is so challenging to resolve. The issue of sovereignty remains a significant and emotive point of contention. Brexit was fundamentally about reclaiming national sovereignty, allowing the UK to make its own decisions without external interference from EU institutions. This desire for autonomy is deeply embedded in the political psyche of a significant portion of the British electorate. However, potential re-entry into the EU would likely require the UK to cede some degree of this newly reclaimed sovereignty, particularly in areas such as trade regulations, lawmaking, and immigration policies, as a condition of membership. The EU's ongoing push towards deeper integration among its member states, including discussions around a more unified fiscal policy and collective foreign and security policies, would demand a level of commitment that could be at odds with the UK's desire for independence. Moreover, the question of political identity is another critical aspect of this tension. Brexit was not just a political event, but an identity-defining moment. It redefined what it meant to be British in the context of a globalized world, and any move to rejoin the EU must contend with this newly emergent sense of identity. For many, Brexit represented a rejection of supranational governance in favor of a more insular, nationally focused approach. Rejoining the EU would require a re-evaluation of this identity, potentially reigniting cultural and political divisions that Brexit exposed and exacerbated. Economically, while rejoining the EU could offer significant benefits such as improved trade terms and increased investment flows, it would also mean aligning with the EU's regulatory standards and trade policies, which may not always align with UK interests. The EU's emphasis on green policies and digital economy regulations, for instance, might necessitate substantial adjustments in the UK's current policy landscape. This alignment could limit the UK's ability to independently negotiate trade agreements with non-EU countries, again touching on the sovereignty issue. These trade-offs are further complicated by the regional dimensions within the UK itself. Scotland's strong pro-EU stance and the complexities surrounding Northern Ireland's unique position in the post-Brexit landscape add layers to the national debate. Any decision to rejoin the EU would need to factor in these regional aspirations and the potential for increased calls for independence should the central government pursue a course that contradicts regional preferences. The tension, therefore, lies not just in the economic calculations or the technicalities of negotiations, but in these profound questions of identity, sovereignty, and regional cohesion. Addressing them requires more than economic rationale. It demands a candid engagement with these deeply embedded issues, acknowledging that any path forward, whether towards rejoining the EU or further solidifying an independent trajectory, comes with significant and at times uncomfortable trade-offs. If the status quo persists and Britain remains outside the European Union without addressing the foundational issues that Brexit has highlighted, the consequences could be significant and multifaceted. Economically, the UK risks continuing on a path of relative isolation amidst a rapidly integrating global economy. While the initial years post-Brexit were characterized by ambitious talk of new trade deals and global Britain, the reality has been more modest. The pragmatic challenges of negotiating bilateral agreements, coupled with the economic downturns exacerbated by global crises, have underscored the limitations of going it alone. In the absence of substantive changes, the UK may find itself increasingly sidelined in international trade discussions, particularly as the EU continues to negotiate comprehensive trade agreements with major global economies. The lack of preferential access to the single market, which remains one of the world's largest trading blocs, could continue to hinder the UK's economic growth prospects. This is not merely an economic concern but a strategic one, as global economic power increasingly consolidates around large trading blocs. Politically, maintaining the status quo could exacerbate regional tensions within the UK. Scotland and Northern Ireland's unique positions in the Brexit aftermath have already strained the Union's cohesiveness. Should these regions continue to feel their preferences are being ignored, particularly if moves towards rejoining the EU gain traction in these areas, it could fuel further calls for independence or increased autonomy, challenging the very fabric of the United Kingdom. Socially, the divisions engendered by Brexit have not been fully reconciled. The persistent polarization could deepen if the benefits of Brexit remain elusive for significant parts of the population, undermining social cohesion and trust in democratic institutions. This division risks becoming entrenched, making future consensus on key national issues increasingly difficult to achieve. In my view, addressing these issues requires a candid acknowledgement of the complexities involved in Britain's relationship with the EU and a re-evaluation of national priorities. While rejoining the EU may offer some economic and political advantages, it must be approached with a clear-eyed understanding of the trade-offs and a commitment to addressing the underlying tensions that Brexit has laid bare. This includes engaging with regional aspirations, balancing sovereignty with the benefits of integration, and fostering a more inclusive national dialogue that bridges the divides Brexit has revealed. Ultimately, the decision to rejoin the EU should not be framed as a simple correction of past mistakes, but as a strategic choice that considers the long-term trajectory of the UK within a changing global landscape. It demands a vision that transcends the binary of leave or remain, recognizing the nuances and complexities of modern governance and international relations. Without such a comprehensive approach, the risk is not merely economic stagnation, but a deeper fracturing of the national identity and unity that challenges the UK's ability to thrive in the 21st century.